3 months after my father died, I sat in Mr. Dalton's law office watching my brother Mitchell slide papers across the mahogany table. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, striping his face in bars of light and dark that seemed almost prophetic. His manicured fingers pushed the document toward me with the casual cruelty of someone dealing cards in a game he'd already won. "Dad left everything to me," Mitchell said, "and he wouldn't even look me in the eye." His voice carried that same dismissive tone he'd used since we were kids, when he'd tell me I was too young, too small, too unimportant to matter. The house on Maple Street, all the savings accounts, his entire truck collection, the investments, even the contents of the safety deposit box. Everything of value is mine. My sister Pauline sat beside him, nodding like one of those dashboard puppets, her blonde highlights catching the light as she bobbed her head in rehearsed agreement. She clutched her designer purse against her chest like armor, her wedding ring throwing tiny rainbows on the wall behind her. "It's what Dad wanted," she added, her voice pitched high with false sympathy. "We have to respect his wishes, Joanna." Mr. Dalton, our family lawyer for 20 years, the man who'd handled my parents' divorce, who'd been at my wedding, who'd sent flowers when Brody was born, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and confirmed what felt like a knife to my chest. "The will is completely legal, properly witnessed and filed. Your father was of sound mind when he signed it 2 years ago." He pushed his own copy toward me, his liver-spotted hands trembling slightly. "You're mentioned here, Joanna. You receive his book collection and his wristwatch." Books and a watch. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, I was worth exactly one shelf of old novels and a timepiece that didn't even work properly. But 3 weeks later, my 7-year-old son, Brody, would make an innocent discovery that would shatter their carefully constructed lies. Hidden in my beat-up Honda, tucked beneath a seat where only a child's toy could lead him, was the evidence that would expose a betrayal so calculated, so heartless, it would destroy our family forever. My name is Joanna Reeves, and this is the story of how my own brother stole my inheritance, how my sister helped him do it, and how a child's pure curiosity brought justice when the entire legal system had abandoned me. This is about more than money or property. This is about a father's final wish, a daughter's unwavering love, and the moment when truth crawled out from the darkness where greedy hands had tried to bury it. Mitchell thought he'd won that day in Mr. Dalton's office, sitting there in his $2,000 suit while I wore the same black dress I'd worn to Dad's funeral because it was the only nice thing I owned. He thought his real estate connections and smooth talking could erase 38 years of devotion, could rewrite the story of who had really been there for Gordon Reeves in his final years. He was wrong. What Brody found wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my father's voice from beyond the grave, his final attempt to protect me from the very betrayal he'd seen coming. Dad always said that truth has a way of surfacing, like cream rising to the top or oil separating from water. Natural laws that can't be denied forever, no matter how hard someone tries to shake the bottle and keep things mixed up and murky. That day in the lawyer's office, watching my siblings divide up a lifetime of memories like they were splitting a check at dinner, I felt completely powerless. I was a single mother, a public school teacher living paycheck to paycheck, fighting people who had resources I could never match. But I had something they'd never understand, something Dad had seen in me that he'd never seen in them. I had the kind of love that doesn't calculate its worth in dollar signs, the kind that shows up every Tuesday with groceries, every Friday with homemade soup, every Sunday with nothing but time and presence. And I had Brody, my beautiful, curious boy who loved dinosaurs and adventure, who had his grandfather's eyes and his grandfather's way of finding exactly what needed to be found at exactly the right moment. This is our story. And it starts with the ending they'd written for me, the one where I disappear quietly into the background, grateful for my books and broken watch. They should have known better. They should have remembered that I was Gordon Reeves' daughter, and he'd raised me to fight for what's right, even when the whole world tells you you've already lost. I had always been the dependable middle child, the one who never needed attention, never caused problems, never asked for more than what was offered. While Mitchell built his real estate empire and Pauline married into suburban prosperity, I became a third-grade teacher at Harrison Elementary, where my biggest victories were measured in reading levels improved and multiplication tables mastered. My apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms on the second floor of a building that had seen better decades. But Brody and I had made it home. His artwork covered the refrigerator, transforming the old appliance into a gallery of dragons, spaceships, and portraits of us holding hands under rainbow skies. Gordon Reeves had been more than just our father. He was the backbone of our family's story. After 40 years at Youngstown Steel, his hands bore the permanent stains of honest work, fingers that could fix any engine but struggled with the tiny buttons on his new cell phone. When Mom died from cancer the summer I turned 12, Dad became everything to us. He learned to braid my hair by practicing on rope in the garage. He sat through Pauline's ballet recitals, recording every pirouette on a camcorder he could barely operate. He cheered at Mitchell's football games, even after Mitchell quit the team to focus on his business classes. "Your mother would want me to keep us together," he'd say, serving us another dinner of slightly overcooked spaghetti and jarred sauce that he'd somehow made taste like love. "Family is what matters. Everything else is just noise." The irony wasn't lost on me now, remembering those words while thinking about what Mitchell had done. Every Tuesday for the past 5 years, I'd driven to Dad's house on Maple Street with Brody in tow. The white colonial with green shutters had been our fortress growing up, and Dad maintained it like a ship's captain caring for his vessel. We'd arrive with groceries, always including the strawberry ice cream he pretended he didn't want, but always finished, the whole grain bread his doctor insisted on, and the gossip magazines he read but claimed were for me. "Joey's here," he'd call out to no one in particular, using the nickname he'd given me when I was 5 and insisted on wearing his work boots around the house. "My best girl's here." Brody would run straight to the garage, where Grandpa kept his collection of classic trucks. 5 beautiful machines from the 50s and 60s, each one restored with patience and pride. Dad would lift Brody into the driver's seat of the blue 1957 Chevrolet, his favorite, and they'd pretend to drive across America, describing the mountains and deserts they'd see along the way. "When you're older, this one's going to be yours," Dad would tell Brody, ruffling his hair. "A man needs something built with real steel, something that lasts." Mitchell visited Dad maybe once a month, usually when he needed something, a signature for a reference letter, a loan he'd definitely pay back but never did, stories about Dad's working years that he could use to charm clients, proving he came from authentic American stock. He'd stay for 30 minutes, always checking his phone, always mentioning a meeting he couldn't miss. Pauline came by for holidays and birthdays, perfectly coordinated visits with her husband Derek and their 2 kids. She'd bring elaborate casseroles and disposable pans, making sure Dad knew she couldn't stay to eat with him because the kids had practice, recitals, play dates. Her life was scheduled in 15-minute increments, and Dad got exactly 2 of them. But Friday nights were ours, mine and Brody's. We'd bring pizza from Tony's, the place Dad had been going to since 1978, and watch old Western movies on his ancient television that he refused to replace. "Nothing wrong with it," he'd insist. "Pictures clear enough to see John Wayne save the day." Dad would sit in his recliner with Brody on his lap, explaining why the cowboys were heroes, how they protected people who couldn't protect themselves, how they stood up for what was right, even when they stood alone. "That's what real strength is," he'd tell my son, his voice grave with importance. "Not the gun or the horse or the badge. It's knowing what's right and doing it anyway." 2 weeks before Dad died, something was different. He seemed nervous, checking the windows more often, asking me to double-check that I'd locked my car. During our grocery run, he insisted on sitting in the back seat with Brody instead of riding shotgun like always. "My back's acting up," he explained, but I'd seen him lift a bag of mulch that morning without wincing. He held my hand longer when we said goodbye that night, his grip still strong despite the arthritis. "Joey, you've been my rock," he said, his eyes wet with something more than age. "Don't ever forget that. You're the one who really saw me, who really knew me. The others, they love me, sure, but you're the one who showed up. That matters more than you know." I thought it was just Dad getting sentimental, the way people do when they feel time running short. I had no idea he was trying to tell me something bigger, trying to warn me about what was coming. Looking back now, I wonder if he knew Mitchell had been circling like a vulture, if he sensed the danger but couldn't quite name it. The call came 3 days later at 5:47 a.m. Mitchell's voice, oddly composed. "Dad's gone, Joanna, passed in his sleep. I'm handling everything." The nightmare began at the funeral. Mitchell had taken charge of every detail before I'd even processed that Dad was gone. By the time I arrived at the house that morning, still in my pajamas with Brody clinging to my hand, Mitchell was already there in a press suit, directing movers who were covering furniture with sheets. "Just protecting Dad's things," he said when I asked what was happening. "We need to preserve the estate's value." The locksmith arrived while I was standing in Dad's kitchen, holding his coffee mug, the one with "World's Greatest Grandpa" painted in Brody's kindergarten handwriting. "What's he doing here?" I asked Mitchell, who was sorting through Dad's mail like he owned the place. "Security upgrade," Mitchell replied without looking up. "Can't be too careful. I'll make sure you get a copy of the new key." I never got that key. The funeral felt like Mitchell's business presentation. He delivered a eulogy that sounded like a LinkedIn profile, talking about Dad's work ethic and fiscal responsibility, never mentioning the bedtime stories or the Saturday morning pancakes or the way Dad cried every time he watched It's a Wonderful Life. Pauline spoke about family traditions, reading from index cards Mitchell had apparently approved. When I stood to share my memories, Mitchell actually tapped his watch and whispered, "We're running over schedule." 3 weeks later came the meeting that shattered my world. Mr. Dalton's office smelled like old leather and disappointment. The walls were covered with certificates and photos of him with local dignitaries, all watching as my life fell apart. Mitchell sat at the table like he was closing a real estate deal, a folder of documents spread before him with colored tabs marking different sections. "According to this will, dated 2 years ago," Mr. Dalton began, his voice carrying the weight of legal finality, "Gordon left the bulk of his estate to Mitchell. The house, valued at approximately $400,000, the savings accounts totaling $320,000, and the vehicle collection assessed at $90,000. My stomach dropped through the floor. "That's impossible. Dad would never do that." "There's a provision for Pauline," Dalton continued as if I hadn't spoken, "a $20,000 education trust for her children, and Joanna, you're designated to receive your father's personal library and his Timex wristwatch." The watch that hasn't worked since 1987? I couldn't breathe properly. Dad had $800,000 in assets and I get a broken watch? Mitchell finally looked at me, his expression crafted with false sympathy. "Dad made his decisions based on capability, Joanna. You're a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. What would you even do with that kind of money? Dad wanted his legacy protected, invested properly, used to build something meaningful." "Meaningful?" My voice cracked. "I spent $5,000 of my savings on Dad's medications when his insurance wouldn't cover the new prescription. I drove him to every doctor's appointment for 3 years. I was there every single Tuesday and Friday, Mitchell. Where were you?" "Running a business," Mitchell shot back. "Creating value. Not everyone can live in the past, playing house with Dad like you're still 12 years old." Pauline shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers twisting her pearl necklace. "Joanna, this is hard for all of us, but Mitchell says Dad was thinking about the family's future. You have to understand, your situation, being divorced and struggling financially, Dad probably thought Mitchell could better manage things. My situation was taking care of our father while you two were too busy to show up." Mr. Dalton cleared his throat. "The will is properly executed, witnessed by 2 employees at Mitchell's office. Unless you have evidence of a more recent will or can prove undue influence or mental incapacity, this document stands." Witnessed by Mitchell's employees? I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. How is that not a conflict of interest? "They're neutral parties with no stake in the estate," Dalton replied. "It's perfectly legal." I spent the next 2 months drowning in impossibility. Every lawyer I consulted wanted a $5,000 retainer just to review the case. "Without concrete evidence of fraud or a more recent will," one attorney told me bluntly, "you're looking at a costly battle with maybe a 10% chance of success. Your brother filed everything properly. The paper trail is clean." Mitchell had already started his victory lap. He sold Dad's 1959 Ford pickup to a collector for $30,000, posting photos on Facebook of the bittersweet moment of letting go of family history. He hired contractors to renovate Dad's house, gutting the kitchen where Dad had taught us to cook, tearing out the garden Mom had planted the year before she died. "He's erasing us," I told Suzanne one night over coffee, while Brody played with his dinosaurs in the living room. "He's erasing every trace of who we really were as a family." "What about Dad's safety deposit box?" Suzanne suggested. "Maybe there's something there?" I laughed bitterly. Mitchell cleared it out the day after Dad died, said it only contained some old bonds and Mom's jewelry, which he's safeguarding for the family. Extended family chose sides without choosing sides. At my cousin's birthday party, my aunt pulled me aside and said, "Honey, you need to accept that your father made his choice. Mitchell's always been the successful one. It makes sense." Even my uncle, who'd borrowed money from Dad twice and never paid it back, shrugged and said, "That's how these things go. The rich get richer." The isolation was suffocating. Pauline called weekly with her rehearsed concern. "You need to think about Brody," she'd say. "This anger isn't healthy. Mitchell's offered to set up a college fund for him if you just accept things and move forward. With Dad's money, that should have been mine anyway? You're being irrational, Joanna. This is why Dad made the choice he made." I started working double shifts, tutoring kids after school for extra cash. Brody needed dental work that insurance only partially covered. The car needed new tires. The rent was going up. Every expense felt like drowning in inches, and all the while Mitchell was posting pictures of his renovations, transforming Dad's simple, perfect home into something that looked like a magazine spread. 3 months after the funeral, I had reached the edge of surrender. The alarm clock at 5:30 a.m. had become my enemy, dragging me into another day of pretending everything was fine in front of 28 third graders while my world crumbled. I'd started applying for weekend jobs at Target, the grocery store, anywhere that would take a tired teacher who needed extra shifts. The exhaustion was bone deep, the kind that sleep couldn't fix because it lived in my soul, not my body. That Saturday morning was unseasonably warm for March, and Brody had been bouncing off the walls since sunrise. "Mommy, can I play in your car while you clean? I promise I'll be careful. I want to play Dinosaur Expedition." "Sure, sweetie," I said, handing him his basket of plastic dinosaurs. "Just don't mess with the radio settings and don't unbuckle your booster seat." I watched him race outside in his Superman pajamas, his hair still sticking up from sleep. The apartment needed deep cleaning, the kind I'd been postponing for weeks. I started with the kitchen, scrubbing grease from behind the stove, trying to lose myself in the simple satisfaction of making something clean. 20 minutes later, Brody burst through the door like he'd discovered gold, his face flushed with excitement. "Mommy, Mommy, I found treasure, real actual treasure." He was waving a manila envelope over his head, dusty and slightly yellowed. "What is that, baby?" I asked, peeling off my rubber gloves. My T-Rex fell under the seat way in the back, behind where you never look, and when I was trying to reach him, I found this. It was stuck under there with some old French fries and a hair tie. "Look, it has your name in big letters." The envelope felt strange in my hands, familiar yet foreign. My name was written across it in Dad's distinctive handwriting, the way he made his J's with an extra flourish. My heart started hammering before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. Inside was a thick document, professionally bound with a cover page that made me sink to my knees right there on the kitchen floor. Last will and testament of Gordon James Reeves, dated 3 days before his death. "Mommy, are you okay? Why are you crying?" Brody climbed into my lap, his small hands patting my face. I read through tears, each word a revelation. The will left the house to me specifically with a detailed explanation. To my daughter, Joanna Marie Reeves, who has been my caretaker, my comfort, and my true family when I needed it most. She turned down promotions to stay close, spent her savings on my care, and never once complained. This house belongs to her because she made it a home. Mitchell and Pauline were each to receive $50,000, generous but nowhere near what Mitchell had claimed. The rest of the estate was to be divided equally among all 3 children, with a special provision that Brody would receive the 1957 Chevrolet when he turned 18, because a promise to my grandson is sacred. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the back that broke me completely. Dad's shaky handwriting, probably one of the last things he ever wrote. "Joey, I'm leaving this with you for safekeeping. Mitchell has been pressuring me about money, showing up with papers to sign, bringing strangers he calls estate planners. I don't trust him anymore. I see something in his eyes that reminds me of my brother Carl, the one who tried to steal the farm when Grandpa died. File this after I'm gone. Don't let them bully you. You were the only one who loved me without a price tag. All my love forever, Dad. P.S. check under the driver's seat. Tuesday's grocery trip. You'll understand." I called Suzanne immediately, barely able to get the words out. "He hid it in my car during that last grocery run. Remember I told you he insisted on sitting in the back? He must have slipped it under the seat when Brody and I went into the store for his prescription. Joanna, this changes everything. You need a lawyer, not Dalton, someone who will actually fight for you." I spent the weekend researching, finally finding Ramona Hensley, an estate attorney from the city with a reputation for taking down corrupt executors. Her office was nothing like Dalton's old boys' club atmosphere, clean, modern, with pictures of her own family and a sign that read, "Justice is truth in action." She reviewed the will while I sat clutching Brody's hand. This is dated after the filed will, properly witnessed by 2 nurses at Riverside Medical Center. See here? Nurse Patricia Gomez and Nurse Daniel Kim. I know them both. They're beyond reproach. She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "Your brother never filed this will. In fact, he actively concealed it. That's criminal fraud. Can you prove it?" "Oh, honey." She smiled like a shark scenting blood. "I'm going to do more than prove it. We're going to expose everything. First, I need you to write down every detail you remember about your father's last days, every interaction with Mitchell, every strange thing that happened." We spent 4 hours building a timeline. Ms. Hensley subpoenaed everything: phone records, bank statements, security footage from neighbors, even the hardware store records showing when Mitchell bought the new locks. She found that Mitchell had accessed Dad's house at 6:15 a.m. the morning Dad died, a full hour before he called anyone. The neighbor's Ring doorbell showed him carrying out 3 boxes, loading them into his BMW. "We're not just fighting for your inheritance," Ms. Hensley explained, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "We're building a case for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder financial abuse. Your brother didn't just steal from you, he stole from a dying man who trusted him." She pulled up Mitchell's social media where he'd been foolish enough to brag. Posts about big changes coming dated 2 weeks before Dad's death. A photo of him at a marina, captioning it, "Soon to be mine," 3 days after Dad died. He was spending the money before he even had it, Ms. Hensley noted. That suggests premeditation. I thought about Dad's last words to me, how he'd held my hand and called me his rock. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known what Mitchell was planning and tried to protect me the only way he could, trusting that truth would find its way to light, even if he had to hide it in the darkest corner of my beat-up Honda. "We're going to get justice for your father," Ms. Hensley promised, "and for you." The courtroom was packed on that Thursday morning in June. Mitchell had arrived in his best suit, the charcoal one he wore to close million-dollar deals, flanked by 2 lawyers from Preston and Associates who charged more per hour than I made in a week. He still carried himself with that unshakable confidence, nodding to people he knew, acting like this was just another business meeting he'd dominate. Pauline sat behind him in the gallery, nervously clutching Derek's hand. She'd avoided my eyes when she walked in, but I caught her staring at Brody, who sat beside me in his only dress shirt, the one we'd bought at Goodwill for his school concert. Suzanne sat on my other side, her presence a steady anchor in the storm that was about to break. Judge Catherine Morrison presided, a woman known for her intolerance of legal manipulation. Miss Hensley had smiled when we learned she'd been assigned. "She grew up poor," she told me. "She knows what family theft looks like." The proceedings began with Mitchell's lawyers arguing that the filed will was valid and binding. "Your Honor, my client followed all proper procedures. The will was filed promptly, witnessed appropriately, and executed according to Georgia state law. This new document appearing months later is suspicious at best, fraudulent at worst." Ms. Hensley rose slowly, commanding the room's attention. Your Honor, we'll prove not only that this newer will is legitimate, but that Mitchell Reeves deliberately concealed it and committed fraud against his father's estate and his siblings. She presented the evidence methodically, building a wall of truth brick by brick. First, the will itself, authenticated by 3 separate handwriting experts. Then, the witnesses, both nurses who testified via video link. Mr. Reeves was completely lucid, Nurse Patricia Gomez stated firmly. He specifically said he needed to update his will because his son Mitchell was pressuring him. He said, "I want to make sure my daughter Joey gets what she deserves. She's the only one who sees me as a father, not a bank account." Nurse Daniel Kim confirmed the story. He asked us to witness it specifically because we had no connection to the family. He said he couldn't trust anyone his son Mitchell might know. But the real explosion came when Ms. Hensley introduced the subpoenaed evidence. Your Honor, I'd like to present text messages between Mitchell Reeves and his sister Pauline, dated the day after their father's death. On the courtroom screen, the messages appeared in damning clarity. Mitchell: "Found another will in Dad's desk. Already handled it. Stick to the story we discussed." Pauline: "Are you sure about this?" Mitchell: "Dad was old and confused. The first will is what he really wanted. This one was probably Joey manipulating him. We're protecting his real wishes." Pauline: "What did you do with it?" Mitchell: "Don't worry about it, it's gone." Pauline's gasp echoed through the courtroom. "He told me Dad had destroyed it himself," she cried out, standing up. "Mitchell, you said Dad tore it up in front of you." Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Mrs. Crosby, you'll have your chance to speak." Ms. Hensley continued relentlessly. She showed security footage from the neighbor's camera of Mitchell at Dad's house the morning of his death, time-stamped at 6:15 a.m. "Mr. Reeves, you stated in your deposition that you arrived at 7:30 a.m. and immediately called 911. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Mitchell's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled him. "I went to check on him earlier," Mitchell stammered, his confidence cracking. "I was worried." "Yet you didn't call anyone for over an hour? What were you doing, Mr. Reeves?" The footage continued, showing Mitchell carrying out 3 boxes, one clearly labeled, "Important Documents in Dad's Handwriting." "I was securing the estate," Mitchell said, but his voice had lost its authority. Ms. Hensley pulled up Mitchell's bank records. "These show you deposited 2 bonds worth $30,000 total the day after your father's death. Bonds that were supposed to be in the safety deposit box you claimed only contained old jewelry. Those were gifts from Dad given earlier." "Then why?" Ms. Hensley asked, producing another document. "Do we have a receipt from the bank showing you accessed the safety deposit box that same morning before you called anyone about your father's death?" The courtroom was dead silent. Mitchell's lawyers whispered frantically among themselves. Ms. Hensley delivered the final blow. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Pauline Crosby to the stand." Pauline looked terrified as she was sworn in. Under questioning, she crumbled completely. "Mitchell called me the night Dad died," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Before he called Joanna, he said Dad had made a mistake with a newer will, that Joanna had manipulated him when he was weak. He said if we didn't protect Dad's legacy, Joanna would waste it all, that Brody would suffer. I believed him because Mitchell always seemed to know better. He's always been the successful one." "Did you know he had physical possession of the newer will?" Ms. Hensley asked. "Not at first, but later he admitted he'd found it and destroyed it. He said it was for the family's own good, that Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end." Mitchell jumped to his feet. "She doesn't know what she's saying. Pauline, stop talking." Judge Morrison's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Mr. Reeves, sit down or I'll have you removed." When order was restored, Ms. Hensley presented her closing argument. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Mitchell Reeves not only concealed a valid will, he destroyed evidence, committed fraud, and stole from his father's estate. He betrayed his father's dying wishes and robbed his sister of her rightful inheritance." Mitchell's lawyers tried to argue procedural issues, technicalities, anything to muddy the waters. But the damage was done. Mitchell himself made one last desperate attempt, taking the stand against his lawyer's advice. "I was protecting my father's legacy," he shouted, all composure gone. Joanna can barely manage her own finances. She lives in a tiny apartment, shops at thrift stores, drives a car that's falling apart. Dad's money would have been gone in 2 years. I'm the one who knows how to build wealth, how to invest, how to make something meaningful from what Dad left." "So you admit you knew about the second will?" Ms. Hensley asked calmly. Silence that followed was deafening. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and devastating. The newer will was validated as Gordon Reeves's true last testament. Mitchell was ordered to return all assets immediately, plus damages for fraud totaling an additional $100,000. She referred the case to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. "Mr. Reeves," the judge said, looking directly at Mitchell, "you've perverted the sacred trust between a father and his children. You stole not just money, but your sister's right to her father's love, made manifest in his final wishes. This court finds your actions reprehensible." As we left the courthouse, Mitchell couldn't even look at me. His lawyers hustled him away, but I heard him mutter to one of them, "I was the successful one. It should have been mine." Pauline approached me tentatively, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Joanna, I'm so sorry. I didn't know about the second will, I swear. When Mitchell told me later, I thought he was protecting us all. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of Mitchell's lies. "We'll see," I said honestly. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." 6 months later, I stood in Dad's kitchen, now legally mine, teaching Brody how to make the spaghetti sauce Dad had perfected through years of trial and error. The recipe was written on an index card in Mom's handwriting, splattered with decades of tomato stains, each one a memory of family dinners when we were still whole. Brody stood on the same step stool I'd used as a child, carefully stirring the pot with the wooden spoon Dad had carved himself during his first year at the steel factory. "Grandpa said you have to stir it with love," Brody announced seriously, making figure eights in the bubbling sauce. "He said that's the secret ingredient nobody can buy." We hadn't sold the house. Despite the financial advisors suggesting we could get top dollar in this market, I couldn't imagine another family living within these walls that held our entire history. Instead, Brody and I moved in, bringing new life to rooms that had been silent since Dad's death. His dinosaur collection now lived in the same bedroom where Mitchell had once plotted his business empires, and my teaching supplies filled the den where Dad had watched his westerns. I kept my teaching job at Harrison Elementary. The inheritance was more than enough to live comfortably forever. But those 28 third graders needed me, and I needed them. I needed the normalcy of spelling tests and reading circles, the genuine joy of a child finally understanding fractions, the pure honesty of 8-year-olds who didn't care about money or wills or family betrayal. The inheritance went into careful investments, college funds for Brody, and a scholarship program I established in Dad's name for local kids whose parents worked at the steel factory. Mitchell's empire crumbled faster than anyone expected. Word spread through the business community about what he'd done, and real estate is built on trust. Clients pulled their listings, partners backed out of deals, and within 4 months, he'd closed his office. The last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona, working for someone else's real estate firm, starting over in a place where the Reeves name meant nothing. He sent one email, brief and inadequate. "I'm sorry for everything. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. I was wrong." I read it to Brody, who was playing with his trucks in the garage. "Do you forgive Uncle Mitchell, Mom?" Forgiveness isn't always about the other person, baby. Sometimes it's about not carrying poison in your own heart. I forgive him so I can be free, but that doesn't mean he gets to be part of our lives. Pauline's journey back was slower, more complicated. She started coming by on Sundays, bringing her kids, but leaving Derek at home. We'd cook Dad's recipes together, and slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. She'd entered therapy, finally confronting her lifelong pattern of following Mitchell's lead, of believing that his success made him right about everything. "I was so afraid of being poor again," she admitted one afternoon, watching our kids play in the backyard where we'd once built fairy houses from twigs and leaves. "Remember after Mom died, how Dad struggled? Mitchell always said he'd make sure we never went through that again. I thought that meant he knew better than everyone else." "Being poor isn't the worst thing that can happen to a family," I told her. "Being broken is." Mr. Dalton lost his license after the investigation revealed he'd helped Mitchell backdate documents and had received a kickback for his cooperation. His 40-year career ended in disgrace. His office shuttered, his reputation destroyed. Ms. Hensley, meanwhile, became a family friend, joining us for Thanksgiving dinner where she made Brody laugh with stories about judges and justice. "You know what you did was brilliant," she told me privately while we cleared dishes. "Hiding that will in your car. Your father was a smart man." "I don't think he meant to hide it there specifically," I said, remembering Dad's nervous energy that last day. "I think he just knew he needed to get it to me somehow, and that was his only chance. He trusted that somehow it would be found when it needed to be." The trucks remained in the garage, all 5 of them, gleaming testimonies to Dad's patience and skill. True to the will, the 1957 Chevrolet was being held in trust for Brody's 18th birthday. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, talking to the air as if Grandpa was right beside him. "I told Grandpa about my spelling test," he informed me one evening, and about how Tommy Marsh was being mean to the new kid. "So I sat with him at lunch like Grandpa would have wanted." "That's exactly what Grandpa would have wanted," I agreed, tears pricking my eyes. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, we held a memorial dinner. Pauline came with her family, Suzanne brought her mother, and even some of Dad's old co-workers from the factory showed up. We told stories that would never make it into any will or legal document, the real inheritance Dad had left us, how he'd driven 6 hours to bring me soup when I had the flu in college, how he'd learned to French braid for Pauline's prom, how he'd sat through Mitchell's entire business plan presentation even though he didn't understand half the terms, just because he wanted to support his son. "Gordon Reeves wasn't rich in the way banks measure," said Harold, Dad's friend from the factory, raising his beer, "but he was the wealthiest man I knew in the ways that matter." That night, after everyone had gone home and Brody was asleep, I sat on Dad's porch swing with the last will and testament, the one Brody had found. By the porch light, I read Dad's handwriting again, his explanation of why he'd chosen what he'd chosen. At the bottom, after all the legal language, he'd written one more line I hadn't noticed before in all the chaos. "The real treasure isn't what I leave you, it's what you've already given me. A life filled with love is the only success that matters." Mitchell had tried to steal money, property, things that could be counted and cataloged, but he'd never understood what Dad's real legacy was. It wasn't in bank accounts or classic trucks or even the house on Maple Street. It was in Brody's determination to stand up for the new kid. It was in Pauline's courage to finally speak truth. It was in my own refusal to let injustice win, even when the whole world seemed stacked against me. Some nights, when I'm cooking in Dad's kitchen or sitting in his chair, I can almost feel him there, nodding his approval. Not because I won the court case or secured the inheritance, but because I fought for what was right, because I didn't let bitterness poison me, because I'm raising Brody to understand that integrity is worth more than any inheritance. The house on Maple Street stands strong, filled with new memories built on the foundation of old ones. Every Tuesday, Brody and I still go grocery shopping, and he always insists on sitting in the back seat on the way home, like Grandpa did that one time. He doesn't know he's honoring the moment his grandfather secured our future. He just knows it feels right. Justice came from the most unexpected place, from a 7-year-old boy playing with dinosaurs, finding treasure in the darkness under a car seat. But maybe that's how truth works. It doesn't always arrive in dramatic confrontations or elaborate revelations. Sometimes it comes in the small hands of a child who still believes in good triumphing over evil, in the pure accident of play that becomes the key to everything. Dad was right about one thing above all. Family is what matters. Everything else is just noise. Mitchell heard the noise and thought it was music, but Brody and we heard the quiet truth underneath. The steady heartbeat of real love that doesn't calculate its worth in dollars and cents. That's the inheritance that can never be stolen, the will that needs no lawyers, the legacy that passes from heart to heart across generations. And in the end, that's the only wealth that matters. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of standing up for what's right, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps these important stories reach more people who might be facing their own family challenges. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members over an inheritance? How did you find the strength to fight for what was right? Share your experiences, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Remember, truth has a way of surfacing, even from the darkest corners, even when all hope seems lost. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.